where survival required strategies that went against traditional beliefs. Even experienced pilots who had once dominated the skies now found themselves struggling to adapt to a completely different kind of battle. The transformation of Japanese air power from an elite fighting force into a desperate defensive effort marked a significant turning point in the war. By early 1945, the situation had reached a point where Japan could no longer sustain effective air operations, as resources, training, and experienced personnel had all been severely depleted. The skies that once symbolized strength and dominance had now become a place of constant danger and loss. American forces, supported by Hellcats and other advanced aircraft, maintained control over key areas, limiting Japan's ability to respond effectively. This imbalance ensured that any remaining resistance would be temporary, as the outcome of the war was becoming increasingly clear. What had begun as confidence and superiority had now transformed into desperation and survival, marking the final stage of Japan's air war. And as the conflict approached its end, the true cost of these changes would become impossible to ignore.
By mid-1945, the outcome of the Pacific War was no longer uncertain, as Japan's air power had been almost completely destroyed and its remaining forces were struggling to survive. The number of experienced Japanese pilots had dropped to an extremely low level, leaving only a small group of veterans surrounded by inexperienced and undertrained replacements. Aircraft production continued, but without skilled pilots to operate them effectively, these machines could no longer influence the course of the war. In contrast, the United States continued to produce large numbers of aircraft, including the Hellcat, supported by a system of training, logistics, and industrial strength that Japan could not match. The difference between the two sides was no longer just about aircraft performance, but about the ability to sustain and support an entire war effort over time. For Japanese pilots who had survived, the war had become a completely different experience from what it had been in the beginning. What once felt like a test of skill and honor had turned into a struggle for survival against an enemy that operated with overwhelming efficiency. Many of these pilots began to understand that they were not simply being defeated by better aircraft, but by a more advanced system of warfare that combined technology, coordination, and production. When the war finally came to an end in August 1945, the surrender of Japan marked not only a military defeat, but also the collapse of the ideas that had shaped its approach to air combat. At airfields across Japan, the remaining pilots gathered in silence, reflecting on everything they had experienced and lost during the war. Some of them had once laughed at the idea of a heavy American fighter, believing it represented weakness and poor design. Now they understood that those extra features, armor, firepower, communication systems, had been the key to its success. The Hellcat was not just a fighter aircraft, but a representation of a different philosophy, combining engineering, production, and tactical doctrine into a single effective system. American pilots, supported by this system, were able to fight more efficiently, coordinate better, and sustain fewer losses, giving them a decisive advantage in the long run. When American forces arrived in Japan after the surrender, Hellcats landed on captured airfields, giving Japanese personnel their first close look at the aircraft they had feared for so long. Many were surprised by its size and construction, realizing that what they had once dismissed as weakness was actually a carefully designed strength. American pilots demonstrated the capabilities of the Hellcat, performing maneuvers and showing its durability in ways that left Japanese observers shocked. They saw an aircraft that could absorb damage, maintain performance, and continue fighting in conditions that would have destroyed the Zero instantly. For the designers of the Zero, this moment was particularly significant as they studied the Hellcat and recognized the limitations of their own design philosophy. They realized that while the Zero had been ideal for the early stages of the war, It had not been built to adapt to the changing demands of modern combat. The Hellcat, on the other hand, represented a forward-looking approach, combining engineering, production, and tactical doctrine into a single effective system. In the years after the war, both American and Japanese veterans reflected on these differences, often agreeing that the Hellcat had played a decisive role in determining the outcome of the air war in the Pacific. Some Japanese pilots acknowledged that while the Zero was a superior aircraft in terms of maneuverability, it was ultimately outmatched by the overall effectiveness of the Hellcat system. This realization highlighted a deeper truth about modern warfare, where victory is not determined by a single factor, but by the integration of multiple elements working together. The story of the Hellcat and the Zero became an example of how technological advancement, industrial capacity, and strategic thinking can reshape the balance of power. It showed that relying solely on past success and traditional methods can create vulnerabilities when facing an evolving and adaptive opponent. For those who had lived through the conflict, this lesson came at a great cost, as thousands of pilots lost their lives during the transition from one era of warfare to another. In the end, the laughter that once greeted the Hellcat was replaced by a deeper understanding of what it truly represented. It was not just an aircraft that defeated another aircraft, but a system that overcame an entire way of thinking about war. The skies of the Pacific, once dominated by the Zero, had become a place where a new kind of warfare emerged and proved its superiority. And for the pilots who witnessed this transformation, the memory of that change remained as a powerful reminder of how quickly confidence can turn into realization. The story ends not with victory or defeat alone, but with the understanding that in modern conflict, adaptation is the key to survival. Those who fail to adapt, no matter how strong they once were, eventually fall behind. And in this case, the Hellcat did not just win the war in the sky. It changed the future of air combat forever.